The courtroom was soaked in a thick silence, the kind that hangs just before a storm. When Thaddeus Voss entered through the side doors in his wheelchair, he didn't need to say a word. His broad chest wore a worn tactical vest, and his gaze was sharp. This wasn't a man pleading for mercy, but demanding justice. Beside him walked Jäger, a striking German shepherd with alert, intelligent eyes. The leash was held by Deputy Marshal Kreel, whose stern face betrayed nothing. Judge Whitmore watched from the bench, his posture upright, his expression unreadable. The air was charged, and everyone in the room felt it. Kreel's grip on the leash was tight, but Thad noticed the subtle twitch in the man's eye. He'd seen that before in combat, the look of someone hiding something. Jäger sniffed the floor, uneasy, almost pacing. There was danger here, and the dog sensed it. Callum Renshaw, Thad's young but brilliant defense attorney, shifted in his seat, eyes darting nervously between the judge and his client. He believed Thad, but knew they were standing on thin ice. Across the aisle, Prosecutor Kreel reviewed her notes, confident and cold. When Judge Whitmore struck the gavel to begin, Thad leaned forward slightly and whispered something barely audible. It was a coded word, a command known only to Jäger. Instantly, the dog stopped moving, then launched. With a fierce bark, he ripped the leash from Kreel's grasp and charged. The courtroom erupted in screams as Jäger tackled the marshal to the ground with surgical precision. Amid the chaos, a small object slipped from Kreel's coat. It hit the floor and rolled. A syringe, wrapped carefully in medical tape. Panic gripped the room. Officers rushed in, dragging Kreel away and trying to restrain Jäger, who stood protectively over the fallen syringe. Judge Whitmore rose, slamming the gavel. Order! Order in this court! But his voice was drowned by shouts, cameras flashing, and stunned murmurs. Thad remained motionless. With steady hands, he passed a small USB drive to the nearest officer. Security footage from the holding cell. He was going to poison my attorney. It's all on there. Kreel's face went pale. Her tightly controlled demeanor cracked. Callum stood taller now, a quiet hope burning in his eyes. From the gallery, veteran journalist Maribel Quinn typed furiously, already crafting tomorrow's headline. Judge Whitmore held the USB between his fingers. His eyes locked on Thad like he was seeing the man for the very first time. And in that moment, the weight of truth split the courtroom wide open. The courtroom emptied slowly, but the tension refused to leave. Thad sat alone at the defense table while Callum Renshaw reviewed the chain of custody for the USB drive, now in the hands of court security. Jäger lay obediently at Thad's side, eyes scanning every movement in the room. There was no celebration, no relief, just the weight of something far from over. Across the room, Kreel remained seated, her eyes fixed on the exit where Kreel had been dragged out. She didn't speak. Her fingers tightened around the pen in her hand, and for the first time, she felt doubt clawing at her certainty. Back in the judge's chambers, Whitmore stared at the still image on the paused video feed. Kreel, in grainy black and white, was seen leaning over the defense table the night before, his gloved hand moving toward Callum's water bottle. Whitmore didn't want to believe it, but there it was. The betrayal was almost cinematic in its coldness. Behind him, a clerk stood nervously. Should we call the FBI? Whitmore didn't answer immediately. His eyes were locked on the frozen image of corruption unfolding in the very courtroom he had sworn to protect. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered, their murmurs building into a frenzy as news leaked from reporters. Maribel Quinn stood near the steps, recording her live segment with the composure of someone who'd seen too many scandals unfold. What we're witnessing may be more than just a wrongful accusation, she said into the camera. It could expose a network of manipulation hidden behind the very laws meant to protect us. Her words landed hard. People were already asking the questions that officials weren't ready to answer. Inside the holding area, Thad was escorted back to his temporary cell. Callum walked beside him, still pale but driven. That syringe. If it had worked, I could have been dead. Thad looked ahead, his jaw tight. That was the point, he replied. They didn't want you alive to make my case strong. Kreel was just a pawn. Callum paused at the door. Then who's behind the board? Thad didn't answer. Not yet. But his eyes flickered with something new. Resolve laced with pain. There was more to this, and he knew it ran deeper than anyone expected. Down in the evidence room, an officer logged the syringe and the video footage as required. But something strange happened when he scanned the chain of custody for Kreel's badge. It showed a transfer the week before, to a division that no longer existed. That can't be right, he muttered. He scanned it again. Same result. And then the computer glitched just for a second, but enough to send a chill up his spine. And somewhere beneath the courthouse, someone else was watching the same footage and didn't like what they saw. Chapter 3: The Man in the Archive Room. 3 floors below the courtroom, in a cold and dimly lit archive room, a man sat alone before a wall of monitors. His name was Silas Hodge, a former intelligence officer turned civilian contractor. Though no one could ever say exactly who employed him, his job wasn't official. His presence wasn't listed, but his access stretched deeper than anyone in that courthouse realized. As the footage of Kreel's takedown replayed on a loop, Silas leaned forward, squinting at the moment Jäger lunged. He rewound it again. That command, he whispered to himself. That wasn't just instinct. He tapped a few keys and cross-referenced Jäger's training records. Classified clearance required. Silas smiled. Nothing was off-limits for him. He pulled up military logs, deployment reports, and behavior analytics. Jäger wasn't an ordinary K-9. He was from a program called Phantom Echo, developed for field operatives like Thad Voss. Dogs trained to respond to unspoken signals, micro-expressions, even emotional cues. Only 5 were ever deployed, and 4 were listed as decommissioned. Jäger was the last, and now somehow he was back in play in court of all places. Above ground, Judge Whitmore called an emergency hearing with both legal teams, demanding to know how Kreel had bypassed internal vetting. Eloan Cray, visibly shaken, presented documents confirming Kreel's clearance had been updated just 2 weeks prior by an automated system with no human reviewer. That's impossible, she said, her voice cracking. This type of clearance requires manual double verification. Callum Renshaw leaned forward. Then someone wanted him inside that courtroom. The silence that followed made the walls feel closer. The judge nodded slowly. I want federal oversight. Now. Meanwhile, in his cell, Thad sat in silence, fingers interlaced, staring at the floor. Jäger rested beside him, his breathing calm, steady. But Thad's mind was elsewhere, drifting through the past. Memories surfaced of the mission in Kandahar, the night their unit was ambushed, and the day he lost his legs. But not everything was an accident. There were voices, orders, delays in air support, and a face, a man watching from a ridge before disappearing. Thad never forgot that face. And today, watching Kreel fall, something in his gut twisted with recognition. Back at the evidence room, the glitch in the system became a priority. A forensics officer tried to trace the corrupted badge transfer. It led to a ghost server, shut down 5 years ago after a military whistleblower leak. The files inside had been wiped, except one. A single line of code remained, embedded with a name, Project Sentinel. In the shadows of the system, the real enemy was stirring, and Thad Voss had just triggered a chain reaction. Rain tapped against the narrow window of Thad's holding cell, a quiet rhythm that barely registered in his mind. He sat motionless, eyes locked on the concrete floor as Callum paced nearby, phone pressed tightly to his ear. They're stonewalling me, Callum said, frustration heavy in his voice. No one's talking. Not the marshal's office. Not the FBI liaison. Not even courthouse security. Thad finally looked up. That's because Kreel was never supposed to be here. He wasn't acting alone. Someone higher up signed off on this, and they're cleaning house now. Jäger's ears perked at the word cleaning, as if he too sensed something lurking. Callum stopped pacing. We need to go public. With the footage, the badge glitch, the phantom server, everything. Thad shook his head. Not yet. The moment we expose what we have, they'll disappear. Erase every digital footprint, and replace it with a cover story before the hour's up. He pointed to the wall. You want to win? We find the architect behind this. The one pulling the strings. That means baiting them out. The right way. Meanwhile, in a dark hallway just outside the evidence archive, Maribel Quinn had managed to bypass a security door using credentials from a contact inside the press corps. Her instincts told her this was bigger than any courtroom drama. She had spent 2 decades chasing government cover-ups and military lies. This had the same stink, but now it involved a decorated veteran and a dog trained beyond standard protocols. As she scrolled through partially deleted files on a monitor, one name stood out: Colonel Everett Cade, listed as the original program lead for Project Sentinel. Back upstairs, Eloan Cray sat alone in her office, a tumbler of bourbon untouched on her desk. She stared at the photo of Kreel from his personnel file, the same man she had vouched for during pretrial clearance. A wave of nausea rose in her throat. She prided herself on her instincts, on reading people. But this was a blind spot she didn't see coming. She grabbed her coat and headed for Judge Whitmore's chambers. We need to reopen the pretrial logs, she said upon entering. Everything Kreel touched, every conversation, every email. I was wrong. At that same moment, deep in a secure data lab across town, Silas Hodge stared at a live feed of Maribel in the evidence room. He didn't panic, he admired. Smart girl, he murmured. A little reckless, but smart. He tapped a button, triggering a silent protocol. The screen went black. Then, slowly, the lights in the archive room began to dim around her. Something was coming, and now everyone involved was in its path. Maribel froze as the archive room lights dimmed, casting eerie shadows over the filing cabinets and exposed wiring. The monitor in front of her flickered once, then died completely. She yanked out her phone and activated the flashlight. No, 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 she whispered, backing toward the exit. Her instincts screamed that she'd triggered something, maybe a silent alarm or worse. Just as she reached the door, it slammed shut behind her with a hiss of compressed air. Locked. She tapped the keypad. Dead. Okay, Quinn, she whispered to herself. Just another locked room with government secrets. Nothing new. At the courthouse, Thad felt it before anyone said a word. An unease like static under his skin. Jäger stood abruptly, growling low. A guard entered the holding area. Your lawyer's requesting you upstairs. Something's happening, he said. Thad wheeled himself forward, Jäger trotting beside him, eyes sharp. As they moved through the hallway, a sudden shift in the building's energy registered. Phones were ringing off the hook, courthouse staff whispering behind clipboards. Something had happened, and whatever it was, it had people spooked. In Judge Whitmore's chambers, Callum tossed a printed file onto the judge's desk. Colonel Everett Cade. Ring a bell. Whitmore frowned. Black projects post-Iraq War. Vanished from public record in 2011. Callum nodded. And somehow, he was the one who approved Kreel's reinstatement. Eloan, standing by the window, turned slowly. That means this isn't just about Thad. It's about burying something bigger. Whitmore leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temples. Then we're sitting on a bomb, and someone's counting down the seconds. Back in the archive room, Maribel crouched by a panel near the floor, pulling free a screwdriver from her bag. She wasn't just a journalist. She was raised by a father who was a Navy engineer. She knew enough about old security systems to override a basic lock. As she worked, a soft hum returned to the room, followed by the unmistakable sound of footsteps above her. Slow, deliberate. Someone was descending the stairs. Her hands moved faster, sweat dripping down her temple. Whoever was coming wasn't there to help. Thad arrived outside the courtroom just as 2 FBI agents pushed past him, their badges flashing too fast to read. They moved with purpose, heading not toward the bench, but toward the basement. Thad's heart pounded. Maribel, he muttered. Callum caught the name. You think she went digging? Thad nodded. If she found what I think Ella found, they won't let her walk out with it. He turned to a bailiff. I need access to the basement. Now. But it was already too late. Maribel had just cracked open the panel, when the archive door creaked open behind her. A shadow stepped in, and the room fell into silence once more. The figure that entered the archive room wasn't in uniform. Tall, lean, and calm, he closed the door behind him with the care of someone trained not to make noise. Maribel rose slowly, clutching her phone like a weapon. "Who are you?" she asked, keeping her flashlight aimed at his chest. He didn't answer. Instead, he stepped forward and held up a small black device, military-issue signal jammer. Within seconds, her phone lost signal. No flashlight, no backup, just darkness and him. "You shouldn't have come here," he said finally, voice smooth like a man who had rehearsed threats before. At that same moment, Thad pushed down the courthouse stairs, refusing help from the guards trying to stop him. "Either I get down there or I start screaming murder in a federal building," he growled. That got their attention. One guard relented and opened access to the lower level. Jäger led the way, ears up, muscles tense. Callum followed behind, heart racing, replaying every worst-case scenario. The hallway was dim, humming with old fluorescent lights, and the deeper they went, the colder it got. "Room 12B, Thad said, pointing. "That's where they used to store sensitive evidence, before they started burying it." Inside that very room, Maribel backed toward the wall, trying to calculate her odds. The man moved like a predator, not rushing, just approaching with certainty. "You think this is about one veteran's trial?" he asked. "This is about operational integrity. You release that footage and everything falls apart. Every case connected to Sentinel. Every covert op built on silence." Maribel narrowed her eyes. "That footage isn't yours to erase." He stopped just feet from her. "It's not about ownership. It's about survival." Then came a low growl. So sudden, so primal, it echoed like thunder. Jäger burst through the door with a force that shook the hinges. In seconds, he had the man on the ground, teeth bared just inches from his throat. Thad rolled in next, eyes locked on Maribel. "You okay?" She nodded, breathless. He tried to shut it down. All of it. Callum entered last, already dialing the FBI's Special Investigations Unit. "We've got him. He's not on any agency roster. No ID, no badge. He's off the grid." The man didn't struggle. He smiled. "You think I'm the only one?" Back in Judge Whitmore's office, Eloan opened a sealed document just delivered by private courier. Inside was a single-page report labeled Project Sentinel, Primary Objectives. Her eyes scanned the page, then widened. "Oh my God," she whispered. The file didn't just reference K9S and soldiers. It listed trials, altered court outcomes, and names. Dozens of names, including hers. And while justice had taken one step forward, it had also exposed a staircase no one was ready to descend. Eloan Cray sat in stunned silence, her eyes fixed on the classified report. Each name printed on that page was a thread unraveling her belief in the very system she had built her career on. Judges, prosecutors, even defense attorneys, all tagged with notes like influenced, redirected, or worse, terminated from relevance. Her own name had a symbol next to it, a checkmark and the word compliant. Her hands trembled. She had never knowingly participated in any manipulation, but now she realized. She hadn't needed to know. They had used her and she had played right into it. Down in room 12B, federal agents arrived to detain the unknown operative. Jäger stayed close to Thad's wheelchair, calm now but still watching. Maribel showed the agents the files she'd uncovered, including a fragment of an email chain referencing a Phase 2 protocol. Callum stood beside her, arms crossed. "You need to get this into a protected channel," he told one of the agents. "This goes beyond military jurisdiction." One agent nodded. "We're already getting pressure to stand down from higher up. Something's off." Thad sighed. "Of course it is, because this thing doesn't end with one name." They returned upstairs to Judge Whitmore's chambers, where Eloan handed him the document with barely a word. The judge read it slowly, his expression hardening. "They've been using the judicial system as a filter," he muttered, "letting certain cases pass, killing others in silence. He looked up at Thad. You were never on trial because you did something wrong. You were on trial because you saw something you weren't supposed to. Thad nodded grimly. Kandahar wasn't just an ambush. It was a cleanup. Flashback. Thad's memory pulled him back into the night that changed everything. His unit had been ambushed after a mission that uncovered a black site hospital experimenting with neuroconditioning. Dogs and humans alike had been subjects. Jäger had led Thad out through a field of burning wreckage. But before they escaped, Thad saw a familiar face, Colonel Everett Cade. He wasn't dead. He was watching and smiling. They said he was Kia 2 weeks later, Thad whispered. But I never believed it. And now, he's erasing every link to the program. Back in her newsroom office, Maribel began drafting her exposé. The headline read, Project Sentinel, the justice system's invisible hand. But even as she typed, she received an anonymous message on her encrypted email. You've seen too much. We warned you. Check your car. She froze. Her keys were already in her hand. Across town, someone watched her from a nondescript sedan, engine idling, waiting to see what she'd do. The truth was out there now, but so was the hunt to silence it. Maribel didn't move. Her eyes locked on the subject line of the anonymous email, heart thundering in her chest. Check your car. She stood from her desk slowly, walked to the window of the newsroom, and scanned the parking lot below. It looked like any other night. Quiet, mundane. But that was the trick, wasn't it? Danger didn't announce itself. It waited, hidden in plain sight. She hesitated, then picked up her office phone and called Thad. They're watching me, she said without introduction. They know I'm going to publish, and they're daring me to keep going. At the courthouse, Thad was already on alert. Don't touch your car. Don't go near it, he instructed. You stay inside. Send the files to Callum. We'll move you to protective custody tonight. Maribel's voice was calm but resolute. No, if I disappear now, the story dies with me. They win. I'll send the files, yes, but I'm publishing. If I go dark, it'll trigger an automatic release of the full report. There was a pause on the line. Thad exhaled. Then be smart. And don't be alone. Meanwhile, Eloan Cray sat in her car outside a nondescript building in Arlington. She had requested a private meeting with a retired federal judge, someone she trusted. Inside, she laid out the report. I need you to help me push this through congressional oversight, she said. They're going to try to bury it, and if we don't act fast, every victim of this program will stay forgotten. The judge nodded gravely. You're risking your career. Eloan's eyes burned. If I don't, I was never the prosecutor I thought I was. Back at the courthouse, Callum met with 2 senior FBI agents behind closed doors. This wasn't just about Thad's case, he said. It was a litmus test. They wanted to see if the system would self-correct. When it didn't, they escalated. One agent opened a folder showing new names flagged in Project Sentinel's leaked metadata. These people were targeted for elimination or discrediting. It spans 12 states. This is bigger than anything we've ever dealt with. Callum leaned forward. Then start treating it like it is. In a dark surveillance van parked outside Maribel's building, Silas Hodge watched the monitors, one hand resting over a red toggle switch. His expression was unreadable. You think you're the only ones who know how to play this game? He muttered. But just as he reached for the switch, his second screen lit up, showing a live press feed. Maribel was on air, already publishing, already moving the needle. The story was out. The world was watching, and the machine that once operated in shadows was now being dragged into the light. By morning, the ripple had become a wave. Maribel's exposé on Project Sentinel had aired on every major outlet, igniting public outrage. Social media platforms were flooded with demands for accountability. Veterans groups, civil rights organizations, and former prosecutors began releasing statements, many confirming details that had long been whispered but never proven. The Department of Justice issued a vague acknowledgement of an internal investigation, but no names were given. Thad Voss watched the chaos unfold from his hospital room. placed under protective custody after Jäger intercepted a second attempt on his life the night before. Judge Whitmore convened a closed-door session with federal oversight officials and military liaisons. He held nothing back. "This court has been used as a weapon," he said, voice steady but low with rage. "Justice was not only denied, it was manipulated, filtered, and sold to the highest bidder." When asked for proof, he handed over every file from Maribel's report, along with the supplemental data from Callum's legal team. No one in the room denied what they saw, but no one wanted to be the first to say what it meant. Meanwhile, Eloan stood before a panel of congressional aides, her voice unwavering as she presented evidence of altered trial records and forced plea deals linked to the Sentinel Protocol. "This isn't just about soldiers," she said. "This is about control, judicial engineering. These men and women were targeted for what they knew, and the system pretended it was justice." One aide asked if she feared for her safety. She answered without pause, "I fear for the people we failed." Back in the data forensics lab, a chilling discovery was made. A second set of files had begun auto-deleting, remote wipes triggered by keywords spoken during interviews. Someone was still watching, still trying to cover their tracks. But this time they were too late. The files had already been duplicated and sent to over 300 independent journalists worldwide. The machine had lost control of the narrative. And when machines lose control, they collapse. Silas Hodge, sitting in a high-rise apartment far from Washington, watched the news feed silently. He didn't run. He didn't panic. Instead, he opened a small black box from his desk, revealing an old photo of Thad and Jäger years ago, standing in front of a burnt convoy. He traced the edge of the photo with a gloved hand. "You weren't supposed to make it out," he said softly. "But now, it's too late to stop you." As night fell, Thad sat upright in bed, Jäger resting beside him. He looked to Callum, who had just walked in with a grim expression. "They're going to try something else," Callum said. Thad nodded slowly. "Then we end it before they can." The sun had just begun to rise over Washington, D.C., casting a soft golden light across the city's skyline. In the quiet of his hospital room, Thad Voss dressed slowly with the help of a nurse, slipping into a dark suit that once belonged to his formal military uniform. It was outdated, slightly worn, but the metal still gleamed. Jäger stood tall beside him, vest tightened, eyes focused. Today wasn't about revenge. It was about closure, justice, and making sure no one else would ever have to fight the system the way he had. Outside, a secure motorcade waited. Eloan Cray and Callum Renshaw greeted Thad at the entrance, tension in their expressions. "They'll try to deny it in front of the cameras," Callum warned. "But we have the documents, the testimony, the recordings." Eloan nodded. "We present it all during the Senate hearing. You'll testify, and we expose Project Sentinel under oath." Thad adjusted his sleeves. "And if they try to shut it down mid-session?" Callum replied firmly. "Then we trigger the international release. We've already prepared the kill switch." Jäger let out a soft bark, as if in agreement. The hearing room buzzed with press and political tension. Lights flashed. Senators whispered among themselves as Thad was wheeled into position, Jäger never leaving his side. When he raised his right hand and swore in, the room fell into silence. His voice was calm, deliberate, every word echoing through the chamber. "I was loyal to my country. I still am. But what they did under the name of security was betrayal. Not just of soldiers like me, but of justice itself." He laid out the timeline, the experiments, the cover-ups, and finally the ambush. "We weren't meant to survive. We were meant to vanish." Midway through his testimony, a senator interrupted, citing classified concerns. But that was the moment Maribel Quinn stood from the press gallery, holding a printed copy of the leaked report. "This information is already public," she said loudly, "and it's not going away." The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Thad turned toward the senator. "You wanted silence, but silence is how monsters grow." After the hearing, it was done. Subpoenas were issued. Investigations launched. Whistleblowers came forward. Names that had hidden behind codes and chains of command were exposed. Some were arrested, others vanished, and the program, Project Sentinel, was dismantled piece by piece. Weeks later, Thad visited the National Veterans Memorial, Jäger by his side. He placed a small bronze tag from his old K-9 unit at the base of the wall. "You brought me back," he whispered to Jäger. "And together, we brought the truth." For the first time in years, Thad Voss felt free. Not just from the chair beneath him, but from the shadows that had followed him for far too long.